Matthew, thanks very much for your time. A victory for workers, says the President, and some relief, hopefully, to be brought to workers who have long been paid much, much less than this national minimum wage.
Yes, no, thanks for having us. We're quite pleased as COSATU. It is a huge victory for workers. It'll mean an increase in the wages of about 46% of workers, or about 6.4 million of the most vulnerable, impoverished workers, such as your retail, hospitality, farming, domestic, cleaning, security, and other workers. It's a campaign that COSATU has fought for many decades, and even other unions before COSATU fought for many years. It's been shown internationally to help reduce wages, levels of inequality, levels of poverty, and so on. So we're quite pleased about it, and we're looking forward to its implementation from effect from today.
Matthew, not everyone was happy with this minimum wage that was agreed upon by all of these different stakeholders. Does COSATU also agree with the people or the organizations that were against this minimum wage on the basis that it should only be a start, that this should be the beginning?
Look, it's a start. The fact that it's going to be an increase in wages of half the workers shows you how badly it's needed. That's not the end of the road. It's just the beginning of the next campaign where we will fight for a living wage. But a minimum wage is very different from a living wage. A minimum wage is a level below which no worker should be paid by law. A living wage is something that unions, workers must campaign for, that business must show the morality to pay, and government must help cajole for. But they're very different. But also, look, the critics who have attacked the minimum wage as being too low, especially, for example, SAFTU, have been quite dishonest, because many of the SAFTU unions, like NUMS and FAU, currently sign minimum wage level agreements or salary level agreements below 20 rand an hour. They sign agreements for 14, 16, 12, 17 rand an hour in such sectors as the food sector, the petrol sector, and so on. So even for those, it's going to be a benefit. But look, for our thing, the bottom line is it's going to mean an increase in the wages for half of the most impoverished workers in the country. That's a huge victory. Workers are looking forward to it being implemented. It's been delayed for too long, and they're quite keen to see their wages go up. Workers need all the assistance they can get. We've had a battery of tax increases, VAT hike, fuel hikes, electricity, water hikes. So this really will be welcome relief for workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Matthew, you make such an important distinction there between a minimum wage and a living wage. I mean, it took so many years to get to the point where this national minimum wage was agreed upon, all of these various discussions taking place. Is that now what will happen? More discussions plotting a way forward towards a living wage?
Yes, and look, one of the things being established by this new legislation is a National Minimum Wage Commission, which includes representatives from COSATU and other labour federations, business, government, academic experts and community. They will review the minimum wage every year. They'll look at challenges and gaps, ways to improve it, enforcement issues. But part of the mandate in the law is to increase the minimum wage to take into account poverty, inequality, inflation, etc. But on the other hand, also us as unions, we need to campaign to make sure our workers don't just receive the minimum wage, but receive healthy increases beyond that.
Yeah.
So it's a twofold approach. But also we look at issues of campaigns like around the social wage, such as free education at university, campaigning for the national health insurance, campaigning for affordable, safe public transport. So not one of them is one solution on its own, but together they bring a broader picture of helping workers be uplifted from poverty.
Matthew, for me, probably the biggest issue at this point would be implementation. If we look at national minimum wage for a sector like domestic workers, for example, how is that going to be monitored, policed?
Sure, that's one of the most difficult issues. For example, less than 5% of domestic workers and farm workers belong to unions. Those are very difficult sectors historically, locally and internationally to organize, because it's individuals working on isolated farms or on houses which are private property. They work by themselves. They're very vulnerable to retrenchments and to mechanization. So it's a challenge for those workers to be informed of their rights to the minimum wage from today. It's a challenge for unions to pull up their socks and to recruit and to campaign and to negotiate for those workers to receive that. It's also a challenge for the Department of Labour to employ more labour inspectors and to visit and enforce it at workplaces. But also workers must know that if they don't receive it, their port of call is to report it to their union, to the Department of Labor, to the CCMA. They can even go to labor court. So there's a variety of mechanisms for which they can report it to. But look, all laws are difficult to implement, but you still have a law. So you set the bar, but also you hope to change the culture and the practice of society. So you might not get 100% compliance immediately, but we're confident that over time you would see people more and more abiding by it and it coming into effect and being felt across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much for your time. Matthew Parks is from Kasatu in the Western Cape.